Hi everyone, it's me. Welcome to today's video. We are doing the June reading wrap up today, and I know I say this every single month, but I'm actually going to have to keep it concise, pick up the pace, and just get to the point today because in the month of June, I read 17 books. I still can't really fathom how I read that much in this past month. It's definitely my biggest reading month yet, which is funny because you guys know last month when we were doing our May reading wrap up, I read 15 books that month. And even then I was like, wow, this is the biggest reading month I have done so far this year. Well, I decided to top that in June, literally not intentionally at all. I was actually trying to slow down my reading pace by the end of the month because I was just like, I have read so many books. My wrap up's gonna be 2 hours long at this point. And so yeah, I was really trying to slow down my reads, just take things page by page and see how it went. But I don't know what overcame me. I just read so much this past month. So let's get straight into the wrap up. So that being said, for the genre breakdown, I read 8 fantasies and then also 2 lit RPGs. I read 2 historical fictions, only 1 literary fiction, and then 3 romances. Oh no, wait, I'm totally lying about that. I read 4 romances. June TBR, 5 out of 5. You know I'm gonna finish that monthly TBR every single time, so that's great. But let's start with our 8 fantasy reads. So number 1, I know I didn't vlog this one, and she is poking up at the top of the frame. That's gonna bug me. I'm gonna put her right down here. But the first book I read this month was actually The Ballad of Falling Dragons by Sarah A. Parker. Book 2, When the Moon Hatched, also by Sarah A. Parker. Of course, a romantasy series. It's going to be a trilogy in total, and this is the second book that just came out. Yes, I was a little bit selfish and I read this just off camera, off screen, just took it for myself because I feel like sometimes I just need to do that. I just need to do like a selfish read sometimes and just like fully experience it in my little bubble here. But if you don't know what When the Moon Hatched is, we're set in a world that is, it's just so immersive and atmospheric. We have a planet that has been created by all of these elemental gods, and in the prologue of the first book we actually get a really beautiful immersive storytelling kind of a view on how the world was actually created by these gods. And in this world we do have fays, kind of in the loosest sense of the term fae, I think, but we basically have nulls. So we have some people who can't access magic, and then we have the people who can access magic, and the way they access it is they're actually able to hear the songs of the gods kind of in their heads, and if they learn these songs and kind of like sing them out loud kind of, they are able to harness the magic from these gods. So they might be able to harness the wind, the fire, water, etc. But it is one of those elemental magic types where you need that element to kind of already exist. Like you need the fire to be there before you can manipulate it. You can't just like summon fire out of nothing, you know what I mean? Like it has to have a source and then you pull it from there. So I think that's really cool. We also in this world have dragons, which is always a win. We have a couple different species, like types of dragons, and also there's this whole kind of mythological feel about them because when they are kind of on the brink of death, they actually fly up to the sky and crystallize into moons. And so in this world, we also, like if you look up at the sky, there are just crystallized dragon moons dotting the sky. And there's something about this world and the atmosphere and the vibe and just the feeling of it that makes me feel magical in the best way. It's escapism at its finest. So that's our world. And then our main character, Rave, is this sort of assassin kind of a character. She's working for this kind of underground rebellion that's going on in the first book, but she gets imprisoned and she crosses paths with Khan, who rescues her in the first book, but Rave doesn't really understand like who he is, where he's coming from, what his intentions really are. So that's the first book, and we go on with the story in the second. I really do love this fantasy series. I think it will be one that is really either a hit or miss for readers because the writing style is a little bit like it's different from your regular romantasy. It's very, very, very extremely descriptive. And what I find while reading these books is like the plots are creative. I think the plot structure and the direction where we go with certain things is quite quite unpredictable and doesn't exactly follow your usual romantasy mold. But if you strip down to like the core of the plot, it's not that complex of a plot. Like there aren't too many powers in play. It's quite an easy story to follow, but it's kind of made to seem a little bit more complicated because of the way it's written, because everything in this world has a slightly different way of describing things. Like the sunlight, the daytime is called day, but like D-A-E, day, and then nighttime is called slumber, and then, you know, a day is called a phase or a cycle, or, you know, like there's just different terminology for every little thing. And I found even jumping into the second book, because it's been a while since I read the first, I was very confused for the first 50 to 100 pages, I want to say, and it did take me a little bit of time to settle back into the world. But once I was settled in, I loved it so much. I think the way that Sarah A. Parker writes in this series in particular, I haven't read her other series, but it reminds me of what Fonda Lee actually told us in our podcast episode when we interviewed her about how she builds worlds, and how she says if you want to build a really convincing fantasy world, you need to think of the details. Like when Fonda Lee mentions a car in one of her fantasy worlds, she doesn't just say it's a car. She doesn't even just say it's a van or it's a whatever. She will give it a name, a brand, a model number, and just the little details like that help convince a reader that this car is a real car. You know what I mean? It's not just a vague entity, it's a real thing with, you know, lots of background information on it. And I think Sarah A. Parker goes the same direction with her fantasy writing. So yeah, I kind of found little parallels with that. So that was great. I also just loved our character dynamics in this. In this book, we do kind of get a bit more multi-POV compared to the first one. So we are exploring more and more and more characters as we go on, which is my favorite way to expand a romantasy or a fantasy series, is just getting more characters. And I think this was multi-POV really done right, where you as the reader are so hyper aware of what every single character knows, and each character doesn't get the full picture, but you as the reader get the fullest picture compared to like all the little individuals that you're following. So as the reader, Sarah A. Parker here made it really clear for me to follow what exactly a character knew, why those facts or non-facts that a character knows are driving their decisions. And as the reader, it can just add the sense of heightened attachment and anxiety in the best way while reading the book. So I love that so much. And it's also just a story where the villain in this book is so interesting to me, because the villain isn't evil just to be evil. Like the villain does have very personal ties with our protagonists as well. And so you can just see like it's so much more, yeah, just personal and tense. And oh my goodness, I also, okay, I'm already rambling with this first book, but the way your mental kind of like inner soul and interpersonal trauma is represented in this book, in this world, I think is so cool. It manifests into this like almost physical realm where our character physically like deep dives into herself in moments to find this physical manifestation of her inner trauma and things that she's kind of like blocked out and locked down. And I just think that adds like a whole other level of creativity to this particular romantasy. So yeah, really, really loved this one. Excited for the third book, but that was The Ballad of Falling Dragons. Next up, I read The Arcane Arts. This is also still a little bit too tall, but this is by S.D. Coverley. This is one of the books that Hopeless Romantic Books recommended for me for that reading vlog. This honestly caught me really off guard. It's not a book that I would typically enjoy reading, or I don't think I would have picked it up if I hadn't had Kirsten from Hopeless Romantic recommend it for me, which I love because I branched out and it was actually a very rewarding experience. So this is a little bit of like a taboo romantasy with dark academia. There is an age gap. There's a weird teacher-student power dynamic between our main characters. And so just with all those elements, it's not a book that I typically would steer towards. But what I loved about this one is it did take a bit more of a literary approach, a psychological approach to the dark elements in this book. So I actually really ended up being surprised by this one. I also really loved the writing style. But in this book, we follow Elspeth, and she really wants to to study into the arcane arts, which is this very dark magic. It's very frowned upon. It's very illegal in a lot of cases, but she is currently grieving the loss, the death of her younger sister. And because of her sister's death, because she thinks her sister's death seems more suspicious than like the police, the detectives are letting on, Elspeth feels drawn to the school where her sister actually died, and she wants to enroll there to study dark arts, to like try and find clues to see what happened to her sister. At the school, when she arrives, she meets Thaddeus Rollins, who is a professor, and she approaches him and asks him, she says, "Hey, let's study the dark arts together. Take me in as one of your grad students and let's dive deep into this dark magic. I know you feel curious about it. I know you had an interest in it at one point. I know it's highly illegal, but let's do it together." And so the two of them get into this dark arts where they start experimenting with things like, can you control someone else, whether it's controlling their mind, controlling their body physically. And as the two of them get into this dark arts, they also get into a little bit of a taboo situation themselves personally. So yeah, first of all, I think the writing style in this really reminded me of a mix between Leigh Bardugo and Olivia Blake, I want to say, with these kind of dark and delicious secret societies in schools and that kind of thing. And then in terms of the taboo romance in this, I thought it was done honestly very respectfully in terms of the professor-student thing. I also just think how everything was consented to and how the development of everything happened just felt very respectful. We did explore the ethics of it. We did go through kind of our characters' emotions and how they felt, their hesitations with jumping into a relationship with one another. And I think with the parallels of how they were developing their personal relationship, but also exploring this magic where you can overpower someone through magic, the parallels between those storylines going on, I think were well done to really give you a full picture of power imbalance, how that affects your characters as they go on. So in a lot of ways, this kind of felt like a dark romance for readers who don't like dark romance, because I think it did touch on some themes of, you know, why a lot of readers do like dark romance, but it approached them in a way that didn't feel as like juicy dark romance-y. It definitely took more of a literary analysis tone on it, at least in my opinion. There was obviously also a mystery portion to this book that I enjoyed. It was predictable, to be honest, but I did enjoy with kind of her sister's death and what happened with that. So overall, yeah, this one surprised me. It did get a little bit too spicy for my liking in terms of like how much spice happened. I think the way the spice was written was actually very well done. I liked the description of the spice moments. It was just like too many times for me personally. But yeah, very surprising. Enjoyed this one a lot more than I ever expected I would. Okay, The Hollow Gods though by A.J. Vrana. This is another one that was recommended to me by Hopeless Romantic. It's also another book that I probably would never have picked up on my own time. And unfortunately, this one didn't hit quite so hard for me. This was probably my least favorite read this month. It's the start to another romantasy series. We're set in this misty town that is actually near Vancouver in Canada. So that was kind of a plus for me to begin with. And in this town, we have this myth of the Dreamwalker. And the Dreamwalker is this ominous figure that lures women into the woods. And when they come back a few weeks later, they're always very different. And the thing is, when these women come back, they actually end up usually passing away very shortly afterwards. So very suspicious things are happening in this spooky little town. And our main character, Mia, is actually starting to see signs that she might be the next girl to be taken and to get lost in the woods. On the other hand, we also follow Kai, who is our other main character. And at the beginning of his story, he just wakes up with no memory of what just happened, and he wakes up beside the body of a lifeless woman. So Kai needs to kind of figure out how he got there, who he is, that sort of thing. And we actually follow a third POV in this. So we follow Mason, who is a doctor. He's an oncologist, but he kind of felt really overwhelmed with his job. It was very dark and depressing and was just really weighing down on him, especially with his last patient that, you know, didn't really go very well. So he, at the beginning of this book, moves into this small town to just kind of try and get away from things, but he starts getting curious and gets involved into what's happening with all of these missing girls and starts kind of playing detective. I actually enjoyed the very beginning of this book. It kind of felt like we were thrown into the story midway through, which felt jarring at first, but honestly kind of felt honest. I think it worked with our characters too, with Kai waking up with, you know, no memory of what happened, that you kind of want to feel like you've just been placed in the middle of something, and also with Mason as a newcomer moving in and then just diving straight into this like mystery that's going on. one, I think it felt good, that it felt jarring to begin with in the story. But then what I will say is after that, I feel like we didn't have a lot of time to get to know our characters, and then we just immediately dove into this mystery without kind of taking some time to get to know Mia, to get to know Kai, to get to know Mason. It was just like, okay, we're gonna go straight in, we're gonna figure out what's going on in this mystery in this town. But for me, it's just kind of hard to get invested if I don't care about the characters. I wasn't the biggest fan of how this romance plotline was done. It felt very much just like our two characters were immediately pulled towards each other for some reason, like whether it's fate or whatever, which sometimes works for me, but I think in the context with this, it felt very just feral instincts attachment. I was kind of hot and cold with this. I think the writing style was also a little bit clunky for me, because on one hand we had this really lush, beautiful descriptive writing, but then it was mixed in with this kind of more modern day dialogue with slang, with this kind of young feeling banter dialogue. And I feel like the switch between the dialogue that felt very kind of like current day to the lush writing of our atmosphere and environment, I just think the mix between those two didn't work for me in this case. So this one didn't quite work for me, but this is an indie author, also a local author, so I don't want to hate on this book too much. I just have to be honest with my opinion. This one didn't really work for me. It also honestly felt a little bit meandering in terms of the pace. It felt like through the story we didn't have a clear, concise target or goal or direction that we were going in. It just really felt like our characters were existing in this world, which sometimes can work, but yeah, didn't work for me in this particular case. Okay, super fun read next though. I read This Kingdom Will Not Kill Me by Ilona Andrews. So this is a really fun one for the fantasy lover. We follow Maggie, who is an avid lover of fantasy books. She has one series in particular that she absolutely loves, but the third and final book in the series never came out. And so she's been left on this cliffhanger of her favorite series for the longest time. She's read and reread books 1 and 2 over and over and over again since she was a kid. And at the beginning of the story, she wakes up to find herself transported into this fantasy world that she knows so well and loves so dearly. And as we follow her, she needs to use her knowledge of the world, the story, the characters to navigate and to try and figure out what will happen next. Also, as she's, going through this fantasy world, she's obviously meeting some of her favorite characters and realizes, some of these characters she knows are going to die in the next couple weeks. And if she doesn't want her favorite characters to die, she's gonna have to use her knowledge of what she knows happens in the books to try and kind of jiggle things around so her favorite characters don't actually die. And so while I was reading this book, kept saying it felt like a reverse murder mystery in a way, where Maggie knew certain things that were about to happen, but if she didn't want them to happen, would kind of need to learn a couple more facts before it actually happened to prevent it from happening. Like find the murderer, find the perpetrator before the person does the thing that she doesn't want them to do. You know what I mean? And I found that to be a fun take, because reading the synopsis of this book, I expected this to dive in, I guess, at the cutoff point of where Maggie's book series ended. And I thought we were just gonna, go on to the unknown story after that point. But what surprised me is we dove into this fantasy world in the first book. So there are plot points that Maggie knows, is going to happen. And I found that to be super fun. I also found it to be really refreshing that Maggie was thrown into this world as a nobody. She wasn't thrown in as the chosen exiled princess. She wasn't thrown in as the villain or any other kind of specific significant figure. She was just herself thrown into this world, and there were some humorous bits where she would kind of forget that she was in a fantasy world and would mention kind of current modern day references and just be like, oh wait, no one here knows what that TV show is. I found that to be a lot of fun. I also just felt Maggie's joy for fantasy through the page, and that made me really giddy, really happy. What I will say is this book is very info dumpy. It is info heavy. Every single character that we come across, we get their entire backstory. And I think for the most part, it made sense in the context of this book because Maggie's a super fan, and I just think if I was thrown into one of my favorite fantasy worlds of, books that I've read over and over and over and over again, and I feel like I know these characters from back to front, I would probably do the same way. I would see a character on the street and I would be like, oh yeah, that character did this, and then this is their mom, this is their dad, this is what happened from their childhood to their adulthood. I would probably go through that in my head too, and that's very much what Maggie did in this book. And as the reader, there were points where the info felt a little overwhelming and a little too much. So while that side of it was fun to read, I think for the first half of the book, by the end of the book, when those character info dumps continued to happen, I just started feeling very overwhelmed with it. And what I found worked for me was to just let it happen. You know, I'm usually the type of reader who feels like I need to memorize everything that's going on, every little detail of every little thing that happens. I'm like, I need to implant this in my brain so when it comes up again, I know it back to front. I feel like with this book, I had to let that go. Just go with the flow while reading this book. Let Maggie do her info dumps. If some of the backstories of, you know, the 100th character that we met left my head, I had to be okay with that and just trust the authors to remind me of those facts when they became significant and important to the story again. So those are my thoughts on this one. Definitely a brain on read. There were points where I was kind of getting a little bit stressed out as the reader because Maggie knew so much more than I did, but in the end, I thought this was really fun, really, really full of twists. And so if you are a fantasy lover, I would highly recommend this one. Okay. The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. This one's a historical fantasy. Ties in the real world story of Mozart's sister with a bit of magic, and this felt very Narnia-esque to me, which I found to be a fun concept to read. So we follow Nan Earl, who was, you know, Mozart's real life sister in real world history. She was always very talented in music as well and had a passion for it and wanted to pursue it. But in the time that they were alive, you know, 18th century Austria, women were not allowed to compose. So while Nan Earl wanted to, you know, progress in music, kind of go in the same path that her brother did, she was never able to. Their father very much reinforced this. But at the same time, what I found to be the part that really hit deep in my heart with Nan Earl's story is that she was still expected to be talented. Her father still wanted her to be talented with music, to be able to put on these private performances for parties and all of that, and to help her family gain fame. But she was always meant to be second place to her brother. You know, she was expected to be good, but not better than her brother. Don't outshine her brother, just be good enough to help kind of elevate him. So we have that as the story, and where the magic ties in is as Nan Earl and Mozart get deeper into their music, they start kind of accessing this, again, this kind of Narnia feeling world, which is called the Kingdom of Back. And in this magical land, we have a mysterious stranger who introduces himself, and he promises Nan Earl that he can make her dreams come true, but of course at a cost. So I found this book to be pretty strong. I definitely enjoyed it. I loved the real world parts of this. I think a lot of it felt very V.E. Schwab to me, kind of Addie LaRue-esque. You know, we have the idea of our protagonist making a deal with this mysterious figure, you know, whether it's the devil, whether it's someone else. And I think the way Marie Lu describes inner feelings and emotions, kind of that inner turmoil feeling of being restricted from fully shining and fully achieving what you want to achieve, I think really reminded me of, yeah, V. Schwab, Addie LaRue writing. I was also really fascinated as I continued to read on through this book because a lot of it is based in real life. Like the Kingdom of Back, this magical world, was actually a fantastical world that Mozart and Nan Earl in real life imagined in themselves. This Kingdom of Back was found in, I think, diary entries where when they were traveling from place to place to perform concert after concert, along the road they would get bored, and so they would kind of think of these magical, mysterious lands, and the Kingdom of Back was one of those. And so I just thought the fact that Marie Lu found this like Kingdom of Back and created a story out of it was really fun and refreshing, and I loved that. There were also just little events that happened in this book that I was like, oh, did this happen in real life? And I would look it up while reading and find out it did actually happen in real life. So while we have a magical twist to the story, of course, and creative liberties with the story, there was actually a lot in here that is historical, that is real fact. And so I really enjoyed that side of this book. What I will say is why this book wasn't perfect for me is when we went to the Kingdom of Back, to our magical counterpart of our story, I just found that part of the book read a little bit too young, kind of middle grade for me. And this book is a YA book, so it will read a bit younger, but I just found the magical world parts, like we had tasks, quests, kind of little things we had to do. I found that progression to be a little bit too middle grade to catch my interest in this day and age with my reading, but I feel like if I read this as a younger reader, it would have been like completely perfect. So that was the Kingdom of Back. I can't wait to get into more Marie Lu because I do really just like the way she writes. Next up, I actually read a little e-arc, and that was Anne Liang's new release of this year, To Dream in Darkness. I've been waiting for this book ever since it was announced because I have been just begging Anne Liang to write another Song to Drown Rivers-esque book, so I was so excited to pick this up. It is yet another mythological, historical, fantasy romance. This one does lean heavier on the fantasy than A Song to Drown Rivers did, but the premise of this one is we have the god of healing and the god of death, and the god of death has been fated to kill the god of healing. But when they meet, when they come face to face, the god of healing sees death and she's like, hey, you have a curse on you. You know what? I'm a healer. I can heal this curse that's been placed on you if you give me 1 more month to live. So they kind of make this deal, this bargain, and they spend the next month with one another. And at the same time, they get into all these other shenanigans and get, you know, mixed up with the Royal Celestial Court and all of this good stuff. I just do really love Anne Liang writing. I love the way she is so descriptive, but also her writing is so simple and quick and easy and fast to read. It's a very different type of descriptive versus Sarah A. Parker writing, for example, where Sarah A. Parker, you kind of really need to take your time with it, where Anne Liang is descriptive, but in a way where it still goes by so quickly. I don't know what it is, it just works so well with my brain. It's almost just like she has a very eloquent way of telling you something very simple. And it's kind of the definition of romanticizing life. This one I think was a bit of a slow burn for me in terms of like when I got attached to the characters. For the first 30%, I was kind of like, this is good, it's beautiful writing, I like, you know, our setup and where we are. But I think what I was noticing was our gods didn't really feel godlike to me. They kind of felt just like humans. And so that was kind of a bit jarring for me to get into at first. But as I continued the story, I saw that that was kind of the point. Like the gods are just people. They happen to be blessed with these godlike magical powers, but they are just, you know, characters with feelings, and they have their vulnerabilities and stuff like that. So I think in the end, it was a smart choice for Anne Liang to write gods this way. I also think as we went on in the story, there was some, like a little bit of a dive into societal classes and how that affects your level of education and opportunities for education. And then also with the education system itself, there was a little bit of talk of how like some educational systems can actually limit knowledge and narrow your mind instead of actually encouraging you to build your knowledge and expand like as far as you can go. Some educational systems can kind of like prevent that from happening. So there were some interesting themes like that throughout the book. There was also a lot in here of like breaking out of your childhood trauma, breaking out of the stereotypes that have been placed on you, just kind of how to break out of that, and also just reevaluating like why you're doing certain things. Are you doing something for the actual thing, or are you doing it for the reputation, the fortune, the riches that come with that? I will say this one didn't hit me quite as emotionally as A Song to Drown Rivers did. I wonder if it's because I read A Song to Drown Rivers first and I kind of know how Anne Liang likes to progress her stories and likes to tell her stories, so I kind of knew certain big moments that were going to happen along the way. And I'll also say I feel like the yearning in this one wasn't quite as strong as A Song to Drown Rivers. There were kind of two romantic plot lines running side by side with the story, one main one and then one kind of secondary one, and what I will say is I felt more yearning and more ache from the secondary plot line. So there's that. I actually really enjoyed the secondary plot line in this over the main story that was going on. But yeah, I thought this was a solid read. It wasn't as good as A Song to Drown Rivers for me, but I don't think like that's not easy to achieve because I love that book so much. So I was really happy with this one. So happy I was able to read it. That was To Dream in Darkness. Okay. The Jasad Crown by Sarah Hashem next. I did finish the Jasad Heir duology, or no, it's called the Scorched Throne duology. It's a romantasy duology based in Egyptian mythology. So essentially the setup in the first book is Sylvia is the long lost heir of Jasad, and she wants to stay hidden because the Jasad kingdom was very much destroyed on purpose, and the kingdom that destroyed Jasad is still very much in power. And so Sylvia just wants to stay hidden, wants to live a quiet life. But in the first book, she of course gets found found out, her magic kind of gets exposed, and the heir of her enemy kingdom makes a deal with her. He will not persecute her as long as she kind of helps him scope out these jasad rebellions that are happening. And so we start, spending a lot of time with the two of them together. I'm so torn with this duology. I'm so torn because on one hand, I think the writing is very good. Like objectively, very good writing, very beautiful. I think the world that Sarah Hashem has created here is very interesting. It feels very rich and deep with culture and history and everything. So I really like that. But I think the pacing, the overall structure of this duology was strange for me. The Jasad Heir to me felt like a prequel where we were getting a lot of backstory on the world. It just felt like, okay, we're learning history in the first book. And then in this one, it felt like we were actually getting into the story and the plot felt better. But this singular book felt like it needed to be a trilogy on its own. Like, I think this series just needed to be longer. I think we needed to linger in some moments a little bit more in this book, which is funny because when I read the first book, I was like, I feel like we need more plot. We're just learning history, but I need more plot. And then in this one, I feel like there was too much plot crammed into one. And I think while everything that was happening was interesting in the plot, I just could not connect to the characters because we were not getting that space to breathe, to rest with our characters, and to get to know them. So I'm just so torn with this duology because I really wanted to love it. I think I could potentially really love it in terms of the direction the story went in. Like, the ending of this book, incredible, incredible. And I, even while reading it, I kind of felt bittersweet reading it because I was like thinking I should be so emotionally impacted by this ending of this book right now because it is the type of book ending that I love, that I devour, that I eat up every single time. But because I just didn't feel that emotional connection with our characters, I didn't care about the ending as much as I would have liked to. So yeah, very torn. I think I did end up enjoying this one better than the first book a little bit. We had multi-POV in this one, which I was very excited about because I always love a multi-POV in a romantasy or a fantasy. And I think having a multi-POV in this second book gave it a lot more of an epic fantasy feeling versus a romantasy, honestly. But yeah, this one was just weird for me. It should have been a 5-star ending for me, but it felt like I was an outsider trying to connect and trying to read into the story, and I just unfortunately could not get there. So that was the Jasad Crown, and I am noticing I need to pick up the pace in terms of how I get through these books because it's already been really long in this wrap up and I'm like not even halfway through. So let's try and pick up the pace here. The last fantasy I read was The Dark Mirror by Samantha Shannon. I'm so excited about this one because if you have been following along with this journey of me reading the Bone Season series, this is the 5th book in the Bone Season series, by the way, I have just been slowly falling out of love with this series. The Bone Season was, I think I rated it a 4.5, like very close to a 5-star for me. Loved it so much. And then books 2 and 3, I was just lagging through. It actually, I noticed this the other day, it took me exactly a year to get from books 3 to books 5. Like, that's how much I have been slogging in this series, and that's how much I have not felt motivated to pick up the next one. So I kind of like didn't have high hopes for this one because I was reading this one, I had it on my physical TBR. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna pick this one up and then I'm gonna reevaluate if I want to continue the series after this point. If I don't love this book, I'm gonna stop at book 5. But I read this book and I absolutely loved it. This convinced me. This reeled me right back into the series, and I'm so happy about it. So, plot synopsis, The Bone Season, the first book. We are set in a near future. It's like 2050s. We're set in London, and in our world, we have some humans are actually clairvoyant. So some can connect to spirits, some can kind of predict the future, some can see visions, some can see dreams, stuff like that. But the government that has taken over, called Scion, actually wants to get rid of all clairvoyants because they're a threat. They could be so powerful, and Scion, the government, does not want them around. So clairvoyants are hunted, and our main character, Paige, is a clairvoyant, of course. What the clairvoyants have done, though, is they formed an underground crime syndicate where they kind of are able to take care of themselves, make money, all of that, and also help each other stay hidden. So Paige is, has a very important role in this underground criminal society. But in the first book, she actually gets caught. She gets thrown in prison, and while she's in prison, she kind of gets this like curtain reveal, kind of sees the back layers of what Scion is actually doing, and what the government is doing is a lot more deep and ominous than everyone on the outside even knew. So that's the first book, and then we go on a lot, we expand a lot from there. And what I loved about this is we're going global, we're going worldwide with the series. And I think that really was a great choice, because after reading books 1 to 3, I was feeling a lot of location fatigue. I was feeling very much like just tired. It's not like the plots were the same in the books. They were definitely very different from one another, but I think just with kind of being in the same area for so long, I don't know, I was feeling location fatigue. And then in the 4th book and now in the 5th book especially, we're really like expanding to the world. And I think just with having so many more players in play, having different governments from different countries all interacting with one another, I think has like woken me up and gotten me back into the series, because the tensions of kind of the alliances that are forming are just so complex, layered, so well done. It's one of those stories where we will have allies and enemies, but those allies and enemies can be interchangeable depending on what situation you're in. Like, you might have to pair up with your worst enemy if you now have an even bigger enemy, like a common enemy. And it's like, okay, now you two need to work together to get rid of that guy. But once that guy is, you know, gone out of the picture, then will you two turn on each other, or will your temporary alliance turn into a longer alliance because now you've kind of personally connected with one another along the way? It's one of those stories. So lots of, yeah, different parties in play. You never kind of know who you can trust, but you want to trust people emotionally. It almost feels kind of Jade City-esque in that sense, where everything is so tense, and if one person betrays, it's like rugs pulled out from under you, everything's gonna be a mess. This series is also taking very much like a heist vibe, an undercover covert mission vibe, spies, gathering intelligence, and I think that is just so much fun. With reading fantasy and even sci-fi, I guess, I feel like a lot of fantasy relies on like physical combat, action, and sometimes there can be a little bit of political maneuvering, but a lot of the time it'll focus on like big, like epic powers kind of a thing, and big, large-scale wars. What I love about these books is, yeah, it's very much kind of like intelligence based, plotting based, scheming based, and I think that is just so much fun. There are some kind of emotional punch points in this one as well, and yeah, I'm just fully back into the series. So I'm so happy I ended up picking this one up, and now I'm just waiting for the 6th one, which I think is coming out March 2027. So not too far off. I'm fully invested into this world again. I also, yeah, again, I think I mentioned this in the past, but I really do like the main romantic subplot in this as well. It's kind of cold and kind of awkward and uncomfortable, the way just the way the romance dynamic works between our characters, and I can't really say much more than that without giving away spoilers, but it's so odd. It's so jarring, the romance, but for some reason I can't get enough of it. I kind of love it. And that's all I'll say, but that's the Dark Mirror. Okay, you guys, shall we talk about Lit RPG, aka shall we talk about Dungeon Crawler Carl? I listened to books 4 and 5 in this past month, and you guys know book 5 was my final goal to reach. I need to quit this series. I do need to quit this series, unfortunately. The thing is, okay, I guess let's go one by one. Let's talk about book 4 first. So Dungeon Crawler Carl, we all know, is the story where we follow Carl and his ex-girlfriend's cat, Princess Donut, as they witness the world ending. They basically get forced into this dungeon crawler game that functions very much like a video game, and they need to traverse through 18 levels of this dungeon to stay alive, essentially. And the whole thing is also being live streamed, Hunger Games style. So this 4th book, I will say I didn't like as much as the 3rd book, because the level we were in, I found just was not as interesting to follow. Quick note on what I liked about the 4th book is seeing Princess Donut's growth, honestly. I think this was the book where it really clicked how much Princess Donut had grown from the 1st book. We kind of saw her progress from this childlike character. She was kind of like born in the 1st book because she was given this sentient personality to run with in this game environment. Like, she wasn't just a cat anymore, she can now talk, right? So she was kind of born as this, yeah, comedic relief character, very childlike, very baby-like. And going into this 4th book, you could really tell she was coming into her own. She was thinking of things ahead of time. She was starting to take care of Carl in some situations instead of just acting like the child of the group. And so I really appreciate how Princess Donut's growth has come along through the series. And the ending of this book was so good. And that's just the pattern with these books, is the last 10% of these books will be so good. That's where all, for me, that's where all the main main plot progression is. Like, in terms of the important things that are happening, 90% of these books are grinding through the level, fighting mobs, fighting bosses, leveling up, and I just find myself, it's not the genre for me. I get bored reading it. It feels repetitive to me, and I know there are important things that are happening kind of hidden throughout all of that grinding that we're doing, but it's just not enjoyable for me to read. So yeah, that was the fourth book. I wasn't really loving it at all until the very end. And then the fifth book, I think we just continued to expand more into what's happening with this world. We have some dark things happening with the AI that's in this world as well, and the character dynamics as we expand our cast just keep continuing to get more and more interesting as we go along. So I will say, in terms of big plot progression, the fifth book was the best. I will say, fully agree with that. I just think I wanted to be blown away by this fifth book, and I wasn't. I was still feeling very bored with the majority of it, I think, with that grinding lit RPG stuff. And I do need to stop after this point. I do. I think it's just me forcing myself through these are causing me to kind of resent the books more than I want to. Like, after reading the first book, I felt like, oh, this is fun, refreshing, different to what I've read before. And then as I've gone on through the series, I've just started to like resent it more and more and more and more. I think just because they're taking up my time. So I need to make the executive decision to stop this series at book 5. I do feel kind of still invested in the characters, which is the funny thing. Like, I want to know what happens to Princess Donut. I want to know what happens to Katya and, you know, all the friends we've met along the way, but I just don't want to spend the time to get there. So it's kind of conflicting feelings for me. I just think it's time for me to tap out. I'll just ask my friends who are continuing the series to keep updating me what happens in terms of the important plot points, but I just want to take my time back for myself. So this is the end of my dungeon crawler road. It's been interesting. Okay, let's get into historical fiction. I read The Young Will Remember by Eve J. Chung. This was so good. This was my 5-star read for the month. Loved it so much. It was perfect. In this one, we're set in the 1950s and we follow an American correspondent named Ellie who travels overseas to cover the Korean War. So she is flying over North Korea when her plane gets shot down and she thinks this is the end. She's either going to die or she's going to get captured. But instead of being captured, a woman actually rescues her. She claims that Ellie is actually her daughter that she lost in the previous war, and so Ellie kind of gets taken in by this family. I think this was just such a good, all-encompassing but on the ground level view of what happens in a war with civilians, with, you know, the people that aren't fighting. There was so much just confusion and chaos almost with what was happening day to day. We were seeing our characters need to adjust really quickly to different situations, and like, our characters didn't know what was happening big picture for a lot of the book. Like, they were just trying to truly live day to day and survive day to day and make the best decisions for the time and with what information they knew. Like, in certain moments they would kind of think things like, oh, let's head over there tomorrow because it seems safer over there. But then the next morning they would wake up, something else would have happened, or, you know, they would have gotten a little bit of a tidbit of different information, and then they would have to decide from there, oh, actually, maybe that place is not a good place to travel. Maybe let's try going over there instead. And so I found that to be a really kind of visceral, realistic look at, you know, what it's like to live in a country during these tumultuous times. What I think was the most interesting part in this book actually was the fact that Ellie was American but also Chinese. She also knew a little bit of Japanese, like how to speak Japanese, but then mixed into this war where people were finding it very hard to identify who she was, what side she was on, whose team she was on. At the beginning of the story, she's an American journalist, but even within the American side, they were kind of like looking at her and being like, wait, you look Chinese, but like, are you Korean? Are you Japanese? Are you Chinese? Like, what kind of Asian are you? There was a lot of confusion with that. And then when she was in North Korea, you know, people were thinking, oh, you look Chinese. So like, are you on our side? But then you speak Japanese, so like maybe you're not on our side. And we saw how Ellie had to kind of like channel the different identities in her in different moments to stay safe in times of war. We also saw her and this family interact and try and like take care of each other, because like at the end of the day, they're trying to survive in this very violent, dangerous time. And so they need to get along. They need to help each other out. But there's always this underlying tension of, you know, like Ellie's an American journalist and this family is North Korean, so they are not on the same team. And there were a lot of moments through the story where it felt very much like they were accusing each other of things, like, oh, but your side did this to our side. Your side started this in the first place. Our side are the victims. So there was this underlying tension, but they were still caring for each other on a human base level. And I just, yeah, found this book to be so great to read. It's written very simply, but we're exploring a lot of interesting themes, which I think is the perfect type of a book for me, where the words will just fly off the page, but you'll be able to use your brain to really think about the things that are happening. I truly loved this so much. I need to pick up Eve J. Chung's other book, The Daughters of Shandong. I'm going to pick that up very soon for sure, but that is The Young Will Remember. Okay, Crescendo by Jane Healy is next. This one I was so excited to read, but unfortunately was not a hit for me. So I was excited about this because it is another historical fiction. It's actually also set around the 1950s, so same time period, but we are set in France in this one, and the focus of it is really, really different. So we are kind of set amongst opera, theater, ballet, and all that stuff. And if you know me, I love theater, I love ballet, I love dance, I love all of that. So I thought this was going to be wonderful. We essentially follow twins. I guess kind of similar to the Kingdom of Back, we have, yeah, twins who are really focused in music. So we have Max, who is one of the twins, and he is a piano prodigy. He's very well known for playing. He's playing concerts worldwide and people are flocking to see him. And then his twin sister, Natasha, is actually his manager. So she goes around, books tours for him, organizes everything, like finds the hotels to stay in, stuff like that. And they, at the beginning of the story, feel like they kind of work well together. Like he's the star, Natasha just wants to like be behind the scenes and travel and everything. But one day, a French man shows up and starts integrating himself into these twins' lives, and we see them just slowly break down. Like Max starts breaking down due to the pressure of his performances. He starts making uncharacteristic mistakes. He misses notes, and then the pressure of just being perfect all the time starts getting to him. And then with Natasha, we start seeing her on a downward spiral of getting these jealous feelings of Max, not because she wants to play piano, but because he's always the one in the spotlight. Natasha wants to be loved. At the same time, she wants to be seen as her own person and not just as her brother's manager. So we dive into this story of jealousy, obsession, of like breaking down under pressure. And this should have been great for me. I was wanting like Black Swan meets Whiplash meets 1950s France. And I unfortunately just didn't really get that. I think the themes of obsession and jealousy and seduction were really strong in this one, which is what the book promised. And I think the vibes of the music and the opera and the ballet were also really, really well written. But I just think from there, we didn't dive deeper into anything. Like as the story went on, we just continued to see the twins as they kept messing with one another and doing these toxic things to one another and breaking down. But there wasn't much depth to it. It was just like everything they were doing was driven by jealousy, by obsession, by all of these things. And I just wanted more substance to it. Just get deeper into like why they're feeling these things. Is there anything external that's affecting this? And it just felt like a very much on the surface level story of the breakdown of these characters, and it just wasn't really fun to read, in my opinion. I think with a story like this, it either needs to be very fast-paced, something like The Favorites, which is kind of very twisty, or it has to go deep, and I don't think this story did either one of those things. So I did really, really want to love this one. The vibes were great, but the progression just didn't cut it for me. Diving into lit fic, I read Heart the Lover by Lily King. In this one, we follow our main protagonist. She is in her senior year of college, and she kind of gets intertwined with these two boys. She kind of catches their attention in a literature class. She starts dating one of them, befriends the other one, and we just follow them as they go on through the course of their lives. It is a very long spanning book that's broken down into 3 parts, and we just see as, yeah, they hang out with each other, interact, get to know each other, and then split ways, and then come back together, and then split ways, and then come back together. I actually really enjoyed the writing style in this one. It felt very blunt, it felt very honest. I liked that it wasn't too over flashy, it just felt like very, very honest writing, but also beautiful in that just very blunt way. So I enjoyed that. I feel like this wasn't an overly flashy story. It was really just one that showed how love and connection can stay with you throughout your entire life, even though you're not maybe spending every single day with these people. Like, you may have lost touch with them, but they will have affected you forever into your soul so deeply. That's definitely what this book was about. The funny thing is, I didn't really love the characters in the story. I didn't really feel attached to any of them. The first part of this book was definitely the part where you were kind of, to me, I think you were supposed to personally get attached to them and get attached to them as a trio, but I didn't really love any of them specifically. So it was interesting moving through the story because I could see kind of the beautiful things that were happening, and the situation at the end of the book was definitely very emotional, got me emotional, but I found while I was reading it for the scene and not for the characters, which I think kind of goes to show Lily King's skill with being able to get me emotional about characters that I don't care about. Like, that's a complete different skill to begin with, just to be able to set a scene and describe it so vividly that I will feel in the moment, that I will feel so affected by it, but it's not because I care about the characters at all. It's literally just because of the way it's written. So that was very cool. I think just kind of the narrative styles of this book were really cleverly done as well. This book is written in 3 parts. Each part kind of has a little bit of a different narrative style, a different POV, and I found that to be very interesting. And also I kind of liked how the story was told chronologically. I think a lot of stories that are told nowadays that span over a very, very long time, like almost an entire lifetime with your characters, a lot of these types of stories are written with alternating POVs interwoven together to really show parallels between, like, you know, this character at a young age versus this character at an older age. And I kind of loved how this was just told chronologically, very straightforward. You really got deeper into, I guess, like the mindset of what those characters were feeling in certain moments versus jumping back and forth. It was more just a concentrated view of different stages of their life, and I think that was very interesting. So overall, very strong book. I am curious to dive into Writers and Lovers next, which is a story that I did look up the synopsis of Writers and Lovers, and I can see why it's so directly connected to this one. It kind of really interweaves through with the story. So I'm excited to dive into that and see how I feel about the characters after reading that one, see if I get kind of deeper into them and to see if I start connecting with them as individuals more. But yeah, that was Heart the Lover. I found it was a really strong read. If you're looking for a shorter book as well, but a powerful one, I think this would be a great one to dive into. Okay, let's close out with our 4 romance books that I read. So number 1, Starshipped by Kat Sebastian. This was another hopeless romantic wreck for me in that reading vlog. I did think this was very cute. Is it my favorite romance in the world? No, but I did enjoy reading it. This one is a queer contemporary romance. So we follow Simon, who has been like a main character on this space TV show for a very long time, for many, many, many seasons. It's kind of one of those shows that isn't quite mainstream, but has a very powerful cult following. But at the beginning of the story, he's actually thinking of leaving the show, doing a little stint off Broadway. He's just feeling like he's really grown out of this role over the past 7 seasons. He's kind of over it. He hasn't really told any of the cast, though. No one really knows yet. But rumors start leaking, and the rumors kind of start pointing to the fact that Simon's maybe not the best person. He doesn't have a great attitude. His reputation is kind of being, what's the saying? Rolled in the dirt? You guys know I'm so bad with sayings, but you know, like, his reputation is taking a hit, and so everyone is now blaming the show breaking up on him. And they're saying that the main cause of this is probably because he doesn't get along with his cast member, Charlie. So Simon and Charlie now decide they need to change everyone's minds. They're gonna start hanging out with each other, kind of going on these friend dates with one another, get paparazzi photos out there, just change everyone's perception on Simon in particular. other. But as they continue to hang out with one another, they, you know, maybe start liking each other more than friends. I did think this was really cute. There were some really tender moments in there. What I really liked about this was I always find it hard to call a contemporary romance an enemies to lovers. And I wouldn't say this is enemies, but I think it is true dislike to lovers done well, done correctly, because these two characters actually don't like each other at the beginning. Like, they don't get along. We do actually have a lot of moments with the two of them. For the first half of the story, I want to say, when they get put in a room together or at a table together and they're trying to like make friends with one another, they actually cannot interact with one another. Like, it's so awkward, it's so uncomfortable. It's not like they have this immediate connection, and we slowly see them build that over time as they start trusting each other more, as they start opening up to each other more, and their kind of like attitude towards each other starts making sense once you find out what is in each other's heads. So I really liked that, and I liked how in the story we did have some like deeper themes going on with the characters. Simon as a person is very anxious. He does struggle with OCD. He does struggle with migraines. So there are a lot of kind of these reasons that he does the things he does that gives off the impression that he's kind of cold. He doesn't like the people around him. But once you get to know him, it's like, no, he just has a migraine. Like, he's trying to protect his peace. And I found that to be a very realistic feeling. I also do think what this book did well is we did bring up themes of like queer baiting in current day time, of how a lot of like mainstream shows and producers will do these things to like write maybe almost gay moments in shows to appease audiences, but won't fully go there. So I think some of that was mentioned in this book, and I think it was done well. Definitely a very important reminder. What I will say is this is definitely a book that focuses a lot on the romance and not so much extra plot going outside of that, which I think in this show in particular, there was a lot of potential for there to be an interesting plot outside of it, because with the space show that was going on, with some of the drama that was happening with other cast members, I wanted to go deeper into that, but a lot of this book relied heavily on dialogue between our two main characters. And if you're like a true romance lover, that's probably perfect. Like, that's what you look for in a romance, but it's just not what I look for in a romantic type of a book. So I did end up getting a little bit bored kind of midway through the book because I was feeling just a bit of repetition with some of the dialogue and moments that were happening. But in the end, I do think overall this was a very cute read. I think Simon and Charlie are so cute together, and they're just one of those couples that fit together perfectly. Like, they're written to be together. Like, you can really truly see their bond with one another. So I think that was well done, and that was Starshipped. Next up, this romance actually had a lot to do with acting and also revolved around a space themed show as well, which is funny. But Into the Blue by Emma Brody, definitely a very different tone, less tender, less gentle, less feel good. We had none of that in this book. None of that, okay? What we had in this book instead was intense yearning, ache, pain, misery, but I ate it up. I ate up every single word in this book. Okay, I loved it so much. So in this book, we follow AJ and Noah, and we follow them as they're kind of in their teenage years, growing up to when they're adults. Like, it's a very long spanning story. AJ at the beginning of the story is a 17-year-old. She has like no goals really. She's broken her arm. She was going to pursue sport, but she broke her arm, and it's kind of at the worst time because she's supposed to be like getting scouted for college, and that's just not going to happen right now. So kind of aimless. The only thing going for her is that she works at this video rental store, and that's her happy place. She loves this, another space cult show that she watches over and over and over again. It's very heavily based in improv, and it's comedic, and it's just great. She loves it. One day, Noah starts working at the store as well. Noah is a couple years older, and Noah comes from a family of actors. Noah's very much a nepo baby, and his family is actually like the stars of the space show that AJ loves. So AJ at first is kind of like, oh, like, do you belong here? Like, you're rich, you're a nepo baby, what are you doing here working at this video store with me? And we see as they clash at first, but due to certain circumstances, we see the two of them start actually training in improv with one another and learning how to act and forming this bond with one another. And we just follow them throughout their entire lives as they come in and out of each other's lives and just continue to act and improv with one another due to certain jobs that they're taking. This book has so deeply affected me, okay? I will give you a warning if you haven't read this book. It's not like like a feel-good, nice, cleanly wrapped with a bow tie type of a romance. It's very messy, it's very ugly, but I loved it so much. I think a part of me, it probably is because I'm such a theater nerd. It probably is because I went to drama school, I went to theater camp, I did all of these improv exercises, so I can feel it so deeply. I never had like an improv theater romance, but I can feel just like the intense feelings that a theater kid feels. And what I loved about this is we definitely had miscommunication in this book, which I know is an annoying trope to read usually, but I loved the way it was done in this because our characters found it very hard to say certain things to one another, but what was happening was instead of actually talking to one another directly, we saw them communicating through their acting and through their improv, and they would say these things to each other in these kind of indirect metaphorical ways, but you could tell that as they were improvising with one another, that's when they were fully being completely honest with one another. And it felt like those moments where you feel like you should be looking away. Like these two characters are having very public, private moments where they're either on stage or they're on screen, they're being recorded for everyone to see, but they're having the most private, intimate moments for everyone to view. And it's like, I should look away, I shouldn't look at this, but you can't look away because it's so addicting and it's so powerful. So that's basically the definition of how I felt while reading this entire book, and just, yeah, the pain and the yearning and the angst I felt was over the top, was incredible. I think Emma Brody did such a good job at writing this book and making it feel as powerful as it did, because to the core, these two characters are very annoying, and the things that these two characters do to one another, very frustrating. But with stories like this, it is very much the way it's written that will make or break it, and I think Emma Brody did a really great job, in my opinion, doing it. The only reason this book isn't a 5-star for me is there was a little bit too much spice in it. In the last act in particular, it was just over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I will say I actually enjoyed the way the spice was written. It just happened too much. But overall, like, almost a perfect read. These characters will stay in my heart forever and ever and ever and ever. That was Into the Blue. Second last book, The Shippers by Catherine Center. Highly anticipated for me because I have loved a Catherine Center in my day, but I didn't like this one. Very different feeling to Into the Blue. We're kind of like jumping all over the spectrum with romance, but this was very much just an outrageous rom-com. Catherine Center wrote this book being like, don't take me seriously at all, because the way this book was written, like there were just so many kind of ridiculous comedic moments that just felt so over the top, and if you're in the mood for that, that would hit so hard. But I was just like, it's a little too much for me right now. So anyways, the premise of this one, we follow Jojo, and Jojo is bad at love. She has just come off a failed almost marriage, and she's going on a cruise where her sister is getting married. So she's gonna be around a lot of love. She's gonna be trapped on this cruise ship, but her and her entire like inner circle, her entire family decides that Jojo is going to find love on this cruise ship. So they set up this scheme where they're going to set up Jojo with her childhood crush, who was also their next door neighbor, who's also coming to this wedding. But since Jojo's gonna be like a little bit busy with, you know, maid of honor stuff, looking after wedding things with her sister, they assign Jojo's childhood best friend to act as wingman. But as Jojo starts hanging out more with, you know, her childhood best friend, it's a romance book. We kind of know where things go from here at this point. This book is so predictable. It's so predictable. And, you know, sometimes I can't even fault that in a romance book, because romances are, like, to their core, they're supposed to be predictable. And that's why a lot of readers love romance and get comfort from them, because you know exactly what's going to happen along the way. I just like to be at least a little bit surprised by romance books. And I think just every step along the way that happened in this book, whether it was the outrageous little moments to the main plot points, like, I saw everything coming, every single thing that happened. And it was written in a very particular type of way where Jojo, as our protagonist, we were deep in her head, and we were just seeing her not being able to clue things together at all. Like, things that were so glaringly obvious right in front of her, she would not accept, and she would like jump through all of these hoops to be like, nope, 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 that's not happening, that's not happening. And to some extent, that needs to happen in a romance to kind of keep the flow and the plot going, or else a romance book would have no plot. Like if we had a main character that just accepted the romance that was right in front of her right from the beginning, there would be no story, right? So to some extent that needs to happen, but I think with this one it was just so so overdone, where she was like, no, like that's my childhood best friend, that's, you know, whatever, he doesn't think that way. And as the reader, you're just like, this is just a little bit too obvious at this point. Like why am I reading this? So yeah, in the end, this was not a complete hit for me. There were some moments that kind of made me laugh. So there were some good points to this. I would say the beginning of this book was like the strongest part for me. And as it went on, it just continued to lose me. That was The Shippers, not a complete hit, unfortunately. But the last book that we're wrapping up, Phoebe Berman's Gonna Lose It by Brooke Averick, was actually a silly little romance that worked for me this month. So in this one, we follow Phoebe. She's about to turn 30 and she has not yet lost her virginity. Now, when she was 17 years old, I think, in high school, she made a promise to herself. She was like, Phoebe, by age 30, you're gonna lose her virginity. So at this point in her life, she's 1 month away from turning 30. She is now desperate. She's like, I need to, you know, make my high school self happy. I need to fulfill my goal and I need to lose my virginity. So she makes this like task list to help her lose her virginity. You know, it has things like give a compliment to the barista, like the cute barista, like go talk to the cute guy who's walking the dog, stuff like that. And we just go on as she tries to find the guy to lose her virginity with. And as we go through the story, there are kind of three main options that pop up. And throughout the whole thing, we're like, ooh, which guy is it gonna be? So in a lot of ways, this felt like those teenage rom-com movies, but make it 30s. And I found that to just be a really fun, nostalgic feeling type of a read. And I actually really enjoyed this one. The first little bit, I will say, felt a little bit like it might be going in the direction of the Catherine Center book, in the sense that everything felt very predictable. It just felt like it was fun, but it felt very classic, predictable, cheesy romance. But the second half of this book caught me so off guard, you guys. There were some plot twists that I actually didn't see coming. And I don't know if I'm alone in that. I don't know if those plot twists were very obvious and it was just me holding a grudge against the romance genre and not expecting there to be a plot twist, but it caught me off guard. I loved the overall progression of the story. I loved how it ended. I loved how everything like came to be and how everything turned out. It honestly felt like not picture perfect, which I love. Like it felt happy in many ways. There was definitely a happily ever after. It's a feel-good romance for sure. But what I loved about this is it wasn't handed to you on a silver platter. Like Phoebe Berman as a character, her whole thing was she has intimacy issues. She has hard times with physical touch. And I feel like with a lot of authors these days, if you're following a character in a romance like that, I tend to see a lot of our protagonists' issues solved once they find the right guy. It's like, oh, I just didn't have the right guy, but now that I found the right one, I can be touched wherever and it's fine and it doesn't affect me. But what I loved about this is Phoebe's problems were still with her. They still existed even when she found the right guy. But the difference was now that guy she found is, you know, comfortable, willing to help her with things, and she feels comfortable opening up with him, and they kind of have their awkward little imperfect moments with one another. And even by the end of this book, they still go through issues. They're still like going to therapy and they're still like, oh yeah, now you're in this next stage in the romance. You're in this next stage of life. Now here are all your other issues that you're going to deal with now. I just found that to be really realistic and something that you don't really see a lot in contemporary romance books these days. So I really appreciated this book for that. I also really loved the friend group in this. They had this really fun like group chat dynamic. We saw a lot of their interactions with one another. So fun, happy surprise with this one. I actually really loved it. I was really kind of feeling like I was in a romance slump because a lot of these kind of like happier types of romances weren't really hitting for me for the rest of this month, but this one did it for me, which was great. And that was the last book that I need to wrap up today. And we just went through 17 books. Here we are, we did it. Now, that being said, we've wrapped up 17 books. Let's get them up onto the shelves. right, you guys, that is going to be it for this one. I hope you enjoyed this wrap up. If you did, please leave me a like and a comment. If you don't know what to comment down below, let me know what your best read and your worst read were in the month of June. If you like me, subscribe, do that bell thing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!